Sylvia and Jenny Likens were two very kind and well-mannered young girls. Their parents, Lester and Betty, worked the traveling carnival circuit, selling food at fairs across the Midwest. Sadly, they couldn't bring the girls along with them that season, so they made an arrangement. For $20 a week, a local woman named Gertrude Baniszewski would look after them at her home in Minneapolis. She was very soft-spoken and seemed like a very sweet lady overall. So, in July of 1965, Sylvia and Jenny moved in with her and her 7 other children. At first, things were going great. The girls went to school, they helped out around the house, but when the payments from their father came late one week, things changed. Gertrude's temper started to show. It was meant to be for both of them, but Sylvia said she would take Jenny's abuse too. It began with just verbal stuff, saying she was dirty or sleeping with young boys for money. None of which was true, might I add. But it escalated very, very quickly. Gertrude began beating Sylvia with belts and paddles, and then she encouraged her children to do the same. And then the neighbors' kids joined in. Most days, Sylvia was kept down in the basement, curled up on the cold concrete, shaking from hunger and fear. When they did bring her upstairs, it was to put on a show. They'd throw her down in front of others and tell her to strip, laughing while she stood there trembling and humiliated. Sylvia wasn't even a person to them anymore. She was just something that could hurt whenever they felt like it. One day, Gertrude heated a sewing needle and told the neighbor's kid, Richard, to carve a message into Sylvia's stomach. It said, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." According to the court documents, she had passed out from the pain, but when she came to, they forced her to stand in front of a mirror. By October, Sylvia could barely stand anymore, but on the 25th, she made one last effort and tried to escape. She made it to the front door, but Gertrude caught her, dragged her back inside, and beat her until she was unconscious. She passed away the next day. Her body was found on a blood-stained mattress covered in bruises, burns, and open wounds, which, might I add, they also poured salt into. Jenny, who was terrified and shaking, told the police everything. Gertrude was arrested along with her daughter Paula and several of the neighborhood kids. The details that came out in court, some of which I couldn't even talk about on here, it's unreal what they did to this girl. 20 years later, in 1985, Gertrude got out on parole and died 5 years later. Linda Price was a 34-year-old single mom living in Jackson, Mississippi. She worked extremely hard raising her 2 kids on her own, but she always made time for the rest of her family also. That fall in 1995, she went to the Mississippi State Fair. While she was there, she met a man who was also in his 30s. He was charming, handsome, and very polite. They hit it off almost immediately, largely because he could make her laugh. And Linda, who rarely did anything for herself, decided to give it a try. Things moved pretty quickly. It was only a couple days after they met when they decided to get an apartment together. Linda, who was so happy to move out of her mother's home, decorated the place with all of her Marlboro and Harley-Davidson memorabilia. Her sister Kathy wasn't so sure about the guy, but she said Linda seemed happy. On Halloween night, Kathy stopped by with her grandkids to go trick-or-treating. This was something that the 2 girls had planned as they thought it'd be nice for the kids. Linda said that she'd be home waiting for them, but when Kathy knocked, nobody answered the door. A couple of days went by and nobody heard from her. This is when Kathy reported her missing, and police eventually forced their way into Linda's apartment. Her body was found in the bathtub, and she had suffered multiple stab wounds. She wasn't wearing any clothes, but there was a washcloth covering her face. The police also noted that there were defensive wounds, but now the question was, where was that guy that she met? Well, it turns out he wasn't just some smooth-talking stranger. His name was Glenn Edward Rogers, and he was already on the run. Just before he met Linda, he had killed a lady named Sandra Gallagher in California, and a week after Linda, he murdered another woman named Tina Marie Cribbs in Florida. The media called him the Casanova Killer. Rogers was arrested on November 13th of 1995 after a chase in Kentucky where he was caught driving one of his victims' cars. He bragged about how he killed over 70 women, and at one point, his brother even said he was responsible for the death of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. He was sentenced to death in Florida and California for both those cases, but he never stood trial for Linda's. Prosecutors thought that the other charges were enough. Just a couple days ago, on May 15th of 2025, nearly 30 years later, Glenn Rogers was put to death by lethal injection, and his last words were as follows: "President Trump, keep making America great. I'm ready to go." On September 6th of 2006, 14-year-old Elizabeth Shoaf got off the school bus and started walking up the road that led to her house in Lugoff, South Carolina. She was just minutes away from her home when a man stepped out of the woods. He was wearing full camo and had a badge. He introduced himself as a law enforcement officer. He said her name came up in a marijuana investigation and that she was under arrest for possession, and that she needed to go with him. Now, she knew she didn't do anything wrong, but she was also 14, which meant she didn't really know what to do. So when he pulled out a pair of handcuffs and asked her to turn around, she did. The two of them then began to walk off into the woods. 15, maybe 20 minutes had passed. There was no squad car or path or anything like that, just thick trees in every direction. That's when Elizabeth finally realized something was wrong. Eventually, the man stopped near a pile of brush. He crouched down and pulled open a trap door on the forest floor. Beneath it was a narrow hole reinforced with plywood and covered in camo netting. A homemade ladder disappeared into the ground, and he told her she had to go down there. The bunker was small and damp, with dirt walls and a low ceiling. Not somewhere anybody would want to be. She seen a single light hanging overhead, there was a mattress in the corner, and the shelves were stocked with canned food. Then he picked up one end of a metal chain that was bolted to the ceiling and tied it around her neck. By now, she knew he wasn't a cop, but who was he? His name was Vincent Fillion. He was a 36-year-old construction worker and self-proclaimed survivalist who'd spent months building that bunker, and another one just like it. He told Elizabeth the place was wired with explosives, and if she tried to scream or leave, she'd never make it out alive. So, over the next 10 days, he kept her there underground, essaying her repeatedly and making constant threats. But Elizabeth didn't panic. She remained calm and tried to gain his trust by listening to him and acting interested in the stuff he was talking about. Eventually, she convinced him to let her use his phone to play some games. And while he slept, she actually used it to text her mother. The messages were short, but she described the smell of the woods and said that she thought she could hear traffic nearby. And that was enough. Authorities traced the pings and narrowed the search using the details that she gave her mother. On the 10th day, officers moved in and they found the trap door and pulled Elizabeth out alive. Fillion was arrested 2 days later and sentenced to 421 years in prison. He died behind bars in 2021. When asked how she made it through, Elizabeth later said, "I didn't want to die, so I tricked them." Make sure to hit that follow button for more spooky stories and true crime cases.